to the second session today. We are here in the Big Tech's room. Pete Behrens is going to be our speaker of the session, My Leadership Journey, 6 Lessons I Wish I'd Learned Sooner. I'm Josh Fryer. I'm going to be here, the volunteer for the room. As we get to the Q&A portion, which will be the last 10 minutes, please do wait for a microphone. We do have virtual participants, and they will not be able to hear anything until we can get you a microphone. And for those who are online, thank you for joining us. Brian is going to be your Zoom advocate, so he's here in the room. He's watching the chat, so please have the chat open. Feel free to communicate with him via the chat if you need something from us here in the room, and then that's where you'll submit your questions as well. So we are aware of you guys online as well. Pete Behrens has been doing leadership coaching and training for many years. If you are familiar with the Certified Enterprise Coach certification from Scrum Alliance, I do know that Pete was involved in the creation of that many years ago. So when we get to a subject of leadership journey, Pete has been on that journey, and he's now leading people through that journey. So excited to hear what he has in store for us today. And with that, I'll turn it over to Pete.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for joining us. I am the founder, CEO of Agile Leadership Journey. It's a group that I started actually about 15 years ago because of some of the challenges I think you might be facing. The talk today is a little bit interesting in the fact that I'm going to go back to some past selves and look at them to help us understand. And one of the interesting things about if you did this, if you go back to a past self, the downside is you can't help them, right? Their decision's been made, their cast has been set, but they can help you. What's interesting about that is their lesson you can apply to your future self. A little bit like Ebenezer Scrooge, going back to some bad choices that he made. I'm going to start way back with my leadership journey. I think my leadership journey started pretty early. As you can notice by this is an actual letter to my mother when I was in kindergarten. It says, Pete has become quite a discipline problem lately, challenging authority by doing what he wants. I think that's a good leadership model, right? I don't need to follow. I should be able to lead. In fact, I didn't do so well in school right away. Some of the subjects, English, spelling, some of those things, I just struggled with. And I think it was coming out a little bit in my behavior, as you can see here. That is until I found math. I don't know about you, but for me, math was something crisp. It had rules that I could follow. And not only that, there was problems you could solve. They were right or they were wrong. And that was really fascinating to me. And a teacher noticed that I was pretty good at math, put me in that advanced class and said, oh, maybe you'll be better here. And I think that's when my schooling really started to take off, is these were things that were really immediate feedback. In fact, I don't know about your textbook or your math book, but mine had the odd number answers in the back of the book. So you could figure it out and say, oh yeah, I got it right or not. Now that continued for me as I shifted into high school and into college. I started to shift into computer science. And again, another language that I found to be very, very fascinating because it had rights and wrongs and very clear rules. And you could tell when you built a program that worked or didn't. It was very satisfying. Does everybody feel that way when you work with math or scientific programs, things like that? And obviously the programs got more complex, right? The problems that we were solving were harder. I would spend weeks sometimes solving problems. And as I got into business and as I was an engineer solving problems, maybe months of coding some complex solutions. But every time you reach that point where you get a solution, there's that satisfaction. I don't get that when I write. When you write, it's like, is it ever done? Is it right? Is it wrong? Is it good? Is it bad? It's very fuzzy. But math and computer science had this very nice, clean, simple language to them. But as I progressed in business, I realized that doesn't always fit. I was running into problems I couldn't solve. And what I want to do is I want to share today some of these problems that I was running into as I got into business that were problems that I couldn't fix, at least at the time. until I started to understand the pattern. Now, I'm going to share the first story. And I wasn't even really a leader, as you could say, yet. I was a technical leader. I was programming something that was pretty sophisticated. I was redoing an entire data structures for a program that we were building. And I was in one of those technical flow states where I would sleep, eat, and pretty much 24/7, I was in the zone. I don't know if you've ever felt that as a tech person, but you feel just incredibly productive. Everything you're thinking about is in this space. Well, sure enough, just as I'm in that zone, here comes Michael. Now, Michael is a fresh graduate coming out of school. Michael's green, he's new, he's young. He's kind of funny, but not so much so in the way that you'd like him to be funny. In fact, he was just a bit immature and green, right? And I was given Michael to mentor, right? Pete, you've got all this knowledge, you got this expertise, this experience. Can you bring Michael up? And I'm like, no, I don't really want to. Like, I didn't want Michael. I didn't need Michael. Michael was there to slow me down. And I don't know if you've ever felt this way when you've been in kind of that expertise sweet zone and get disrupted. It's not very fun. And so I thought, okay, how do I get Michael in a way where he doesn't disrupt my sweet spot? So I thought, well, maybe I can get him on a feature that maybe doesn't matter so much. And I kind of found this like import wizard he could do while I'm working on kind of the guts of this application. And for a while that was working. In fact, I describe it a little bit like we're two kids in a sandbox, each playing with their own toys, and we were happy. But then, of course, ultimately, we want the same toy. And this wasn't the toy metaphor, but what I'm saying is, at some point, we had to bring his work integrate into the application. And that's when I was saying, like, oh, shit, I made a mistake. Michael's design, I never really paid attention to, but it was bad. His implementation was worse. I was trying to find something to salvage out of the situation. Unfortunately, we had to scrap the entire thing. I felt terrible. Michael felt terrible. I don't know if I ever rebuilt that relationship from that point. Like, this was one of those really bad situations where essentially I had to get in the car, put him in the passenger seat and say, okay, Michael, we're going to do this together now. And it was one of these things where what I was doing was realizing that my expertise alone wasn't going to cut it. Now, I'm describing a mindset, and what I want to do is I want to build a parallel that you might understand. So, who here, by show of hands, has a dishwasher at home? Okay, 99% of you have a dishwasher at home. Who here, by show of hands, has somebody at your household who has one way to load that dishwasher? Okay, about 85% of you. Now, what happens when somebody else in the household doesn't load the dishwasher in that right way? Are we happy about that? A little bit of conflict. Okay, now think of this. I'm the person who has one way to load a dishwasher. My spouse doesn't necessarily agree with that. She's the Michael in this story. I'm me in the story. Do you see this now? I've got the expertise. I know how this works. Here comes somebody trying to upset this. You know how that feels a little bit, right? That's a simple solution. But now, here's an interesting thing. I've discovered, now it's taken me 2 decades of marriage. I'm in my 3rd decade, but in 2 decades of marriage, I found out what was going on. My guess is you or whoever it is in your household who has a one way to load a dishwasher has a math formula in their head. And it goes something like this. Right means the most dishes are the most clean. This is a volume/quality formula. Is that true? For many of you, it's like a lot of you are engineers or scientific background. You're looking at this as a formula of volume and efficiency. That's how I look at this problem. And I always saw the other people not loading the dishwasher this way as wrong. I'm right, you're wrong. But I've learned there's something different here. It isn't that they are wrong. They have a different formula in their head. What's their formula? Right equals the fastest time to load the dishes. Now, think of this. What happens when that's your formula is you put the dish wherever it goes, the quickest. All the silverware goes into the frontmost silverware dish, right? I've learned over time, this isn't a right, this isn't a wrong. We're optimizing two different solutions. So what am I getting at here? My story with Michael is a story that every leader is going to face. It's a story between what we call expertise, what we bring to the table with our experience. We were hired as leaders because we're expertise. We have our experience, our education, our application into the space. We were put in this role as leaders because of that. And yet we're asked every day to be open to everybody else. And this is a constant dilemma that you are going to be facing in the workforce, where there is not a right formula to fix this problem. We call this interdependence, meaning you have a place in the world, they have a place in the world. How are we going to work together to solve this problem? And before I totally answer that, I want to bring in story number 2. Story number 2 happens a few years later. I'm in a formal leadership position. I've been hired as a VP of engineering of a small, young startup. We have a team that is immature, a little bit like Michael, but they're a little bit better. They're not disciplined. This is back in the day when Agile was still kind of new, but I had some experience at this. And so I was brought in to help bring discipline to this team, bring structure, bring, Agile, in a sense, was I was thinking, let's bring Scrum into this world. And I did that. And we had a couple of teams, and we got them up to speed, and they're running, I think, pretty good. We're iterating, we're reviewing, we're retrospecting, we're doing all the Scrum ceremonies, and we're building product. At least that's what I thought. One day I came into the office, and my architect came into my office and said, Pete, we're meeting in the conference room, we need you. I'm like, okay, it wasn't really scheduled, but sure, maybe they got a nice surprise for me. And sure enough, it was a surprise, but not a nice one. I would only describe it as an intervention. I don't know if you ever had this. My team sat me down and said, Pete, this isn't working. I'm like, what do you mean? You think that we are collaborating when you carry all the cards. You're our Scrum Master. You're our product owner. You're our manager. This isn't the way Scrum is supposed to work. And I'm like, oh, really? Here I've been raised as Christian. I've been raised to respect people. I've been raised to collaborate. I don't think that my authority overrules. But yet at the same time, that's exactly what they felt. They were feeling my authority. Now, I struggled with this for a long time. Like, how did I miss this? How did I miss my heavy hand when I had no idea that heavy hand was being played, right? I'm their boss, but I thought I was doing the right thing. Now, 5 years later, this story repeats, but now I'm a coach. And I've been hired by Richard, who's almost in the same position I was as a leader. He has a new team. He's an experienced leader. He's like, Pete, I want to get this team operating in a more mature way. Let's use Scrum. I'm a Scrum coach at that time, so I'm bringing Scrum into his team. Great, right? Almost identical to what I did, except for now I've got the battle scars. Now I understand maybe what to do, what not to do. I think I'm in a better position. But I realize Richard has all the experience I have. Richard has a lean black belt. He's very experienced. He's actually probably, in this case, older than I am, more experienced than I am, but maybe not at Agile or Scrum. But as I'm working with this team and working with Richard, I'm realizing, dang, he could have done this himself. What am I even doing here? I started to question myself as a coach, like, what's my role? Why am I here? Am I being judged? Am I doing this right? And I finally got the courage to ask Richard, you're experienced here. Like, you have all the information you need to do this. Why did you bring me in? And he said, Pete, if I brought this to the team, they'd do it because I'm the boss. By bringing you in, an expert in the field, they're doing it because it's the right thing to do. And that just blew me away. The concept that he could recognize, self-aware, the authority that he was carrying and the influence that has on his team, and yet set that aside in order to bring someone in to help with that. Let me give you a little metaphor to kind of explain this a little bit. I call this credibility. Now, credibility is an interesting balance between a couple of things. One is what I'm describing as authority. Think of the referee, right? We've all played sports. We've all seen sports, whether it's soccer or football or basketball, right? A team sport, we have a referee or an umpire. Now, they have a whistle. They can blow it. That's their job. Their job is authority, manage the rules of the game. We know what happens when a referee fails to blow their whistle, right? Chaos. People start trying to cheat. I can foul. You're not going to call fouls? Sure, I'm going to foul, right? So if a referee does not use their authority, we know there's a problem. But do you know there's an equal problem when the referee blows their whistle too much? Have you felt that? Have you seen that? What do players do? They start losing respect for the referee. What does the crowd do? They start getting upset because they're breaking the flow of the game. They're not respecting the players. You know what the best referees do? They talk. They counsel. They warn. They build relationship with the players to build respect. So what we're recognizing is, yes, authority is given, but respect has to be earned. And one of the biggest challenges I find with leadership, and in this story, me as that VP of engineering, I built my authority. I assumed I had the respect, but I didn't. Richard recognized his authority. He hired me. I mean, he had the authority to do that. Yet he knew that he had to build the respect in order to build credibility. And this is, again, one of those challenges every leader is going to face. It's a problem you can't solve. Now, here's the pattern. I'm a math person. I'm a computer science person. I love solving problems. Here it is. I ran into two problems I couldn't solve. And the reason is these are problems that can't be solved. They're what we call tensions that can only be managed. What does that mean? Essentially, think about a tension, right, as two things that have a right, two things that are good. In this case, what we're talking about is expertise. That's good. We need you to have experience. We need you to have education. And we also need you to be open. Just like authority, we need you to be authority. You have to follow the rules. You have to hire fire. You have to make sure people are following the laws and the governance of the organization. At the same time, you need respect. These are two basic tenets where a tension has two positive elements. Now, here's what I'd like to do. Can I get two volunteers to come up? All right, we got one. Another volunteer. Come on up from the back. Run quickly. Come on up on stage. Come on up on stage. We're gonna have a little bit of fun. What's your name? Daniel. Thank you, Daniel. And we got one more person coming up here. I don't know if they'll need a mic, but I'll repeat if they say anything. But that's fine. They might need their hand. They need their hands though. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I want you to both grab this rubber band. Oh, sorry, your name?
Jared.
Jared, thank you, Jared, for coming up. I appreciate the volunteer. Okay, so they have a rubber band here. And what I'm going to ask you to do is let's increase the tension in this rubber band. Increase that tension. How does it feel?
Tight.
Tight. It's harder to pull. Okay, now, what I want the audience to start to think about is we've talked about a couple of tensions, but there are other types of leadership tensions that you might see in your role or you've seen in the organization. What are some other leadership tensions that you're aware of? What would jump out to you? Personality conflicts. Okay, so give me an example.
So my situation I'm in right now, I've got a technical program manager and a CTO who see very different sides.
Yes.
Problem, but because of, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Because of their different personalities, they're not able to see that they see the same problem.
Yeah. Okay, so what you're starting to get into, I'm going to get into next, which is two different people with two different directions have in mind. I'm talking about your own personal conflict, where you have a tension inside of you. Any other ideas? We got a hand up back here. We only have one mic running around. How's it feeling, by the way?
The tension's still there.
Are you building muscle?
At this point, yes.
Yeah? Is it starting to tire? Should we add more tension, or you're good?
No.
Okay.
I think sometimes there's a tension of letting people learn and make mistakes, and then also not having mistakes.
Yes, perfect. I appreciate that one. What we're talking about is autonomy on one side, right? Freedom to make choices and mistakes, like Michael. I didn't give him, he made a mistake, but it was really bad, right? At the same time, do we control that situation? Do we prevent those mistakes? Do we want do we want quality focus? That's going to be a tension that you might face as a leader. What's another one? If you could shout it out quickly in 3 words, do so.
Between leading and doing.
Leading and doing, yeah. So do I get hands-on? Do I jump in the trenches, work with the team, and just be part of that team? Yes. Or should I be above the team? Should I be looking strategically? Should I be out front? Yes. This is another tension. Okay, so you guys are getting the point. There's a dozen of these things where leaders are constantly faced with problems you're not going to solve.
I'm just going to name another one.
But you can manage them. Now, how do we ease the tension? How would you guys ease that tension? There you go. Easing tension, what does that require? It requires alignment. It requires integration. Now, look at this a little bit like riding a bicycle. Riding a bicycle we think of as, okay, I've got to balance and go forward. But in true, what it is, it's a tension between falling left and falling right. So when we think about that tension, you don't think about it when you ride a bike, but you are constantly left and right, left and right. And when we think about this, managing attention is the same way. It's not like one time we're going to say, oh, let's be autonomous. No. I want to control. That's a really schizophrenic and bad leader. The sweet spot in this tension, the managing tension, means how do I be free and autonomous and control at the same time? Can I get 2 more volunteers to come up? 2 more. Okay, we need a woman. Thank you. Come on up. I need 1 more. Okay, come on up. We're going to keep going on this metaphor. It gets more fun as we go. There we go. Yep. Your name? Lauren. Thank you for joining us.
Sure.
And you are? Richard. Thank you. Now, we're going to grab 4 sides to this rubber band. And I want you all to pull in different directions. All right. Now, what are they setting up here? Right? We've already kind of touched on it. We've already started to tease on it. You started to bring this out. Direction, priorities. It's not just 2 people, is it? No. Oftentimes in the organization, we're going to have 4, 5, 6 cooks in the kitchen who all believe they know the recipe, right? Who wins? Who wins? The strong, there you go. The bully wins, right? What do they call that? The loudest voice in the room kind of thing? The biggest paycheck in the room. Whatever that metaphor you're using, what we're seeing here is this is, again, one of those situations, it's a problem that will never be solved. But it can be managed. Come on together. Whew. You can just feel that tension. Group hug. Give him a hand. Give him a hand. Thank you. So let me just tell you a story. Who here is into product leadership, product ownership, product management? Okay, we got a lot of hands going up. Maybe about 40% of you are in that product role. I used to be a Scrum coach and trainer and taught Scrum Master product owners, and so I worked with a lot of that role. And I had a product owner, Jody, who was in charge of a team, and her team supported probably about 6 or 7 key stakeholders in the business, right? It's a small functional team that works on lots of different parts of the system. Maybe you call them a platform team, but they've got lots of different services that they're doing. And she described how she felt like ping pong. She said, I go talk to a stakeholder, and they say, hey, I need this. And she's like, bam, she feels like she's been whacked by a paddle. And then she gets thrown across the net over to the team. And she's like, team, okay, the stakeholder needs this. Team's like, hey, wait, we got this, and we got this tech debt, and we got this. And she's like, bam, she gets hit again, right? The team's hitting her. Now she goes back to another stakeholder. Then she talks to this stakeholder, and the stakeholder's like, bam. And she just like, I'm getting whacked around. I'm just getting beat up like a ping pong ball I'm just getting smashed. I'm not making any progress. I'm not making anybody happy. Have you ever felt like this? This is a problem you will never solve. When I taught product ownership, I said this is not a problem to solve. It's the only best you can do is optimize, right? Optimize, which is more of a calculus term in terms of problems. In business, what we find is there's very few right answers, and direction of priorities fits into this frame. Like you as a leader, you're going to say, well, what's right, A or B? Well, yes, both. Either. Choose one. Choose both. There's no right. But what we do know is there's better ways to make decisions. And as a product owner, this is what I want you to start to learn. You will never solve that problem, but you can manage the problem. So I asked her to describe. I said, what would it be like for you to play a different game? And she said, what I would like is I would like the stakeholders to fight each other, not me. I want them to bash the ball around. And so what we came up with is we came up with a concept of poker. And we said, what if you were the dealer? You're not a player. And what if we stacked those stakeholders down around the table and they all got a set of chips and they had to place bets? But they're not betting against you. Who are they betting against? The other players, the other stakeholders. So she created a meeting. She called it Battlezoid. She said, this meeting is going to be contentious. Once a month, stakeholders, if you have an interest in what's coming up in the next 2-3 months, you are going to come to this meeting. If you do not come to this meeting, you will not be represented, and likely your focus will not be addressed. So if you care, you're going to come to this meeting. Number one, make it urgent for them. Number two, you are not going to convince me. You are going to convince them. So that changed her role entirely from the ball to the dealer. And she created an environment where she presented, this is the team's capacity. This is our current priority list. You're going to come out of here with a new priority list. Not disrupting our sprint, but loading the backlog for the next month or so. And we will do this once a month. And it completely changed from contention problems she was trying to solve to a tension she was managing. So, alignment, again, isn't one or the other. It is thinking about how do we bring this together. So when we think about problems, that's really what we call a duality mindset. A or B, right or wrong, black or white, empower or engage, empower or control, go fast or do it with quality, right? Do tech debt, do new things, right? These are all tensions. Easing that tension requires what we call an end-based mindset. It's quality and speed. It's autonomy and alignment. It's hands-on and hands-off. It's strategic and tactical. This is a mindset. Yet this is a mindset I don't find in many organizations. What I find is the black and white thinking. We see it in our politics every day. Immigrant or not immigrants, right? That's a duality thinking. We know the problems are complex, and I'm not here to obfuscate one particular ideology or another, but that's the mindset we see in corporations. It works in politics because the voting public will buy into those things emotionally. It doesn't work in business because we're smarter than that, and we need to compete with an end-based mindset, especially in this complex world. All right, number 4. I'm sure you all have this notion of top-down, bottom-up. Anybody feel this tension between stuff coming down, we want more empowerment going up? This is another one of those things you're not going to fix. And I think you know that. But how do we change our mindset around it, right? How do we change the way we think about it? In fact, top-down, bottom-up is one simple tension. When we get to organizational tensions, they get more complex. This is a model that we use to kind of start to draw out organizational tension. Who here can share with me some of the tensions you feel in the organization. And if you can shout them out in 2 or 3 words, great. I'll repeat them. If you can't, we'll get the microphone over to you. What's a tension?
Political infighting.
So political infighting. So say one or two more words around that.
Different sort of groups of product teams fighting for resources against one another.
Okay. So we have a resource allocation tension, right? Keep going. What are some other tensions? Timeline versus?
Reality.
So we have timeline probably versus features, versus quality of life, versus quality of the product, versus more features, tech debt, so time is an interesting one because it ends up on one side and the other side is very complex on what counters time. Yeah, give me another one. In the back. Okay, so just ideology of the way we do business. And maybe I'm going into that, agile, not agile in a little bit, which we'll come to in a minute.
Context and data.
Oh, interesting. Say 1 or 2 more words of context and data.
Just context at the lower level, but data, but reflecting that in a way that can be
Yeah. What I might suggest is he's saying basically context and data, either we have the data or we don't. We have the context or we don't. And a lot of times leadership is making decisions without the context, without the data, so the data is not in the right hands. So here's what's happening in the organization. This model is basically saying all 4 of these quadrants are important to effective business. And I'm not going to go into the details of the model, and I can share more with you with that. We teach leadership around some of this. But what I want to show you is what tension looks like. Here is a result of a survey that we run that basically exposes tension within an organization. Now, we can take this survey in lots of different ways. This happens to be a bank in Northern Ireland. That was part of a global bank, so this was a division of a larger multinational organization. And what you're seeing, I don't have the legend on here, but what you're seeing essentially is 2 views. The red is leadership, the black is employees. So that's number 1. You're seeing those 2 perspectives. Red, leadership, black, employees. The second thing you're seeing on here is solid dotted. Solid says, this is the tension we feel today. Dotted says, this is where we'd like this rubber band to be. So just as I had 4 people stand up here, this model can be used to see what direction are we feeling the tension. So one of the interesting things about this is you will notice between this red, control, and the green, create, you'd say they're aligned. Leaders and employees agree. We are a bureaucratic, we have too much process, right? Typical control, like over control. But you expect that in banking, right? That's typical. They also lack innovation, autonomy, freedom, empowerment. That's in the creative quadrant. So what you're seeing here is we all agree our tension is out of balance. So that's good because that's something we can work on together. But notice the other 2 dimensions, and that was what the fascinating. I presented this data to a C-suite who was doing a workshop with us in Belfast. And this was the interesting one. Look it up here, and look it down here, in the yellow and the blue. Leaders are saying, we're good, we're collaborating, we're competing. What that means is we're working together, and we're going fast. And employees are like, hell no. We're not even close to you on this. All we see is push, push, push. All we see is you're already late, get going. They only feel the pressure. So this was the mirror that we wanted to present to leaders, because here's another tension. And you said context and data. The leaders didn't have the context or the data to even know this was happening. They may see it in other symptoms. People complain all the time. These are symptoms, right? It's like I'm scratching an itch. Great, that's a symptom. But what's below the surface? What's causing that itch? That's what we're getting at here. There's something causing that itch, and that is a tension of values. We are not contextually aligned on this. And this was data for the leaders to absorb and say, why is this happening? And what was really ironic, here we were at an offsite with leaderships collaborating. And they're like, you know what? We do collaborate. As leaders, we collaborate on strategy. We build this together. But then what happens? We put it in a PowerPoint deck. We schedule an all-hands meeting. We communicate it to the world. We say, get going because you're already late. And so what does everybody else feel? All they feel is go, go, go. You don't have time to collaborate. So what's fascinating, here is the same organization 18 months later. Not a perfect organization, but notice how the tension has come together. This is what we call alignment. What we're talking about is how, as an organization, tension creates waste. Tension's what's creating the waste. And you might say, well, how did you go from A to B? How did you go from tension to no tension? I'll just kind of go back through those. Look at that. Tension, less tension. Not perfect, less tension. What we talk about with leaders, it's not top down or bottom up. It's what we call inside out. And this isn't a what, it's a how. What we say is, it really doesn't matter what you focus on, it matters how you do it. And what we try to help leaders do is whether it's change, whether it's strategy, it's a co-creation. The more people get involved in that, the more they are going to be understanding. So whether or not it's should we be involved in the strategy to we are involved in the strategy, the number one thing I tell leaders in co-creation, you might want to write this down because I didn't put it on the slide. Don't bring the solution, bring the problem. If you share the problem with the people, that's co-creation. You share the solution, that's a push. So all this leadership team had to do was bring the problem, not giving up direction and strategy, like that's not what I'm suggesting, is we're not saying, hey team, steer the ship. No. Leaders can still come up with direction, but they don't have to have the answer. We want to achieve this, help us get there. So to me, the metaphor is a little bit like that row, the crew team, right? We can have the best team in the world, but if they're splashing, it's not going to help. It's not going to make a difference, right? It creates friction, and friction slows us down. So what we're seeing is this is a line of a lot of different organizational tensions, some of which you've talked about: go fast, do it together, keep things running, do new things, right? There's hundreds of tensions inside organizations we face every day. And the problem I see is when leaders approach these as problems to solve, because they will never be solved. They're on two ends that are right, and they can only be managed. So I'm going to cover my last point, number 5. And you're going to say, Pete, you said we had 6 things. Right? That was the title of my talk, 6 things that I learned on my leadership journey. So I'm going to share with you 5, but recognize that the 6th is the pattern. And one of the things I found when you go to a past self is if you can learn from that experience, great. That's a good lesson to learn. But if you go back to a few past selves and you can find a pattern, that's gold. Because patterns can be repeated. And this is one of those patterns that I think you can repeat. In fact, it's such a pattern, our entire focus of what we teach leaders is this pattern. Switching from a problem-solving mindset to a tension management mindset, whether it's for yourself as a leader and how I'm navigating my world of hands-on, hands-off, tactical, strategic, empower, align. Like, these are fights we have internally. Or if it's the organization, these are fights we have with our peers. Everything we teach shifts the mindset from problem-solving to tension management. So let me just talk about the one that's all of us are here for, right? We exist because of this particular tension, right? We exist because of this. Do we manage in a structured way, in a predictable way, in a planning world, or do we adapt to change? Right? All of us are here because of this. I'm here because of this, right? And one of the things that I find with leaders, I don't know if you get this. Leaders will ask me, they'll say, Pete, how do we decide for this project which to use? And I'll say, you're looking at this like a duality. You're looking at this like an or. Thinking about a switch, turning on predictable planning, turning on agile, that's not the way to think about this problem. The only way we address this problem is through a dial. Some projects don't require so much change. Some projects, maybe the dial can be at a 2 or 3. But other projects are going to require a lot of change. We need to turn that dial up to 8 or 9. One of the things that I think the best conversation we can have with stakeholders and leaders, how much uncertainty is in this project? Technical uncertainty, market uncertainty, teams new to this uncertainty, right? We're in a new business space uncertainty. Well, let's talk about the uncertainties. Let's turn that dial appropriately. Now we've got expectations. Okay, as much planning as we do, we know there's going to be change. But there's other programs where it's like, we've done this, we've been there, we expect that to be not so dramatic. Now, we take this all the way back to the Agile Manifesto, and this is where I think we've put ourselves into the problem. The way the manifesto was written is a switch. I know it doesn't say it in the fine print, but in the major print, people over process. Collaboration over contract, progress over documents, and I'm summarizing here, right? But what it's saying is one is better. That's not what the Agile Manifesto was saying. The Agile Manifesto was saying this is a tension, and the tension is out of balance. The only way to do this effectively is bring it better in balance. That means we're turning the dial, and this is where I think a lot of us in the room get ourselves into trouble. We pit planning as bad. We pit predictability as bad. It's the enemy. It's not. It's the other side of a tension that if we don't respect, they're not going to respect us. And this is where I think a lot of coaches get into trouble because we prophesize, right? The second coming of Agile and it's like Jesus. When that's not the case, it's just we've got this out of whack. How do we get this back in alignment? And this is why I'm actually grateful that the PMI and the Agile Alliance are kind of getting together because I think this is on both sides of this tension. And I think that's where it belongs. But it doesn't mean we forget about it. It doesn't mean we can ignore it. We just have to manage it. And that's essentially what we try to do is help break through that barrier, thinking of this as a either or and into a both end. And that's essentially everything that we do. Now, the reason we focus at Agile Leadership Journey on leaders, not the organization, because I've seen the pattern over and over again. We help the organization, but we don't help the leaders. What do we get? I call it the 2 games we play. We get Agile at the team game, but leaders continue playing their game. Right? And it's a very different game by very different rules. And what do you get? You get conflict. You get tension between leaders and teams. And many of you in this room live in that line in between those two. And you feel that tension. You are the intersection between the leadership team that's not in this room, most likely, and the team game. A lot of you are in this room. Why aren't the people that are the leaders in this room? They should be. Our whole role in the world, I feel like our organization's whole role in the world is to address the leadership team, not you. You're talking to the choir. I'm speaking to the choir here. But what I tell organizations, when I'm working with a middle tier, middle management, if you're a project manager, you're a product owner, you're a scrum master, you're an art leader, or run whatever safe word you want to use, you're probably somewhere in the middle of the organization. I call you the activation layer. Because you feel the pain below, and you have access to the leadership above, some of you, or you should. So rather than thinking about yourself as you're stuck between a rock and a hard place, think of yourself as you are the only one who can actually make this change happen. Agile Leadership Journey is essentially helping leaders do this, and as I said before, that's pretty much our whole mission. Helping organizations improve by aligning and managing these tensions better. So I just want to say thank you. So that leaves us to some Q&A. And happy to have our microphone person pass around. If you have a question raise your hand. We got one down here, Star. Box microphone is coming out too. So we have 2 microphones and box microphone in there. All right, thank you.
So, was wanting to ask, what language do you use to help communicate where a leader wants to set the dial on the tension? How do they help their team understand this is the balance we'd like to create right now? And how do you set them up to talk about the change in that balance in the future?
Yeah, interesting. So how do we help leaders decide? I'm going to broaden the question a little bit. Number one, how do we help leaders decide what to do? And then maybe secondly, how to help leaders decide where, and you said specifically turn that dial. One of the fascinating things that I found is we don't have to tell leaders any of this. What we have to do is provide leaders the data for them to make informed decisions. All these leaders are smart. They're not dumb. Most of these leaders, I would say, are ignorant, kind of like I was in my early career. I was doing things I had no idea the impact was having. That's where I see most bad leadership, is ignorant, unaware, uninformed leadership. One of the things we find is bringing the data to the leaders and helping them understand, the levers, so to speak, allows them to make more well-informed decisions. So I would suggest even not saying where on this dial it is, because that's irrelevant. It's kind of like a story point. The story point's irrelevant. The conversation's what you want. The dial creates the conversation. That's what I'm looking for. I don't care where the dial ends up. I just care that the conversations are happening.
We have a comment online from Lee.
Yeah.
On the manifesto, I think the dial exists in the while we're there, the value in the items on the right. We value items on the left more.
Yes. So, yes, and that's what I'm saying. In the fine print, it's managing the tension. But who remembers the fine print? It's kind of like anything we do. People remember the big picture. They remember the overs. And the overs are basically just saying the tension's been out of balance. We got to bring it in balance. And, whether it's DEI, whether it's Agile, this tension's been swinging back and forth a lot, right? So, you can even go back to the days of centralized, decentralized, right? That's another tension you can talk about, that we swing the pendulum back and forth. The Agile Manifesto was saying at one point in time, the tension was out of whack. Let's rebalance it. What I'm suggesting is the language of the Agile Manifesto leads people down to interpret it wrong. But the fine print is right, but I don't think most people interpret it that way. So thank you for that comment online. Other questions? There's one here. Queue up if you want.
So you talk a lot about data. How do you get this data?
Yeah, thank you. So how do we get this data? I'll jump back to a slide showing some data. So what we're doing essentially is, I guess it was a long ways back than I thought. Okay. So what we're doing is leveraging a framework. And again, for us, frameworks are useful, but not. It's like a recipe. It's a starting point. We're using a framework that's been well established over probably 4 decades now. It's called the Competing Values Framework. It was developed out of University of Michigan. It's been used around organizations worldwide. We simply leverage that tool, but we've built our own components around it, our survey aspect around it, to basically generate these tension models. So it's a pretty simple engagement for an organization to basically send this out, get the feedback where we want to get the feedback, and bring that back to leaders. And typically when we're working with a leadership team, that's the number one thing we do, is get data. What's the data? But it's, simply a survey. That recognize when you're feeling a tension, everybody feels it differently. It's like we're all touching a different part of the elephant. But collectively, what's valuable is the common tension that's felt. And so that's what we're looking at, is all these are perceptions. There's nothing real here, but perceptions are a reality that are important. Another question. Back in the room. By the way, I'll share here a feedback form. I know you've got some feedback forms. I always love your feedback. Our team loves your feedback as well. So I'm just going to provide this one. If you want to give feedback directly to our team, it has a couple of questions on there. I'd love for you to provide us some feedback, but not taking away your other feedback to the conference. So if you want to give me some feedback, I'd love it. I also have some goodies up here to give away before you leave. If you want, I've put a few pencils, pens, stickies around the room if you want, QR codes, but I also have a few gifts up here if anybody's interested to see me after. In the back.
Thank you. When you are applying your solutions or having conversation with, particularly with the global teams.
Can you put it up closer?
Sure.
A little bit? Yeah.
When you're working with teams who are more global, or
Yeah.
there's that sort of cultural background aspect, and you're working on some of those solutions, when you talk about like tension and talk about sort of like credibility and all of that, how much of that cultural background play a role in the way you communicate, or does it even play a role in the way you
Sure.
make those solutions?
Yeah, so I think what we're talking about is we have kind of regional or country cultures, right? If I go to India, I was just in India a couple weeks ago, or China or Europe, right? We have different sub-regional cultures. And a culture is another word you can use for some of these values and things like that. I used to talk a lot about culture. I've actually stopped talking about culture because I think it glazes leaders' eyes. They're like, yeah, blah, 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 culture. I think the same is true with Agile. Yeah, Agile, blah, 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 right? They've glossed over. What we're finding is sometimes you got to change your language to reach the leaders. They want to talk risk. They want to talk, they appreciate talking about tensions, and they love to have alignment, right? Now, those are key words that touch on culture. But to your question, what I find, industry culture dominates country culture. If you are in a bank, if you are in insurance, if you are in transportation, that's going to dominate your culture more than the country or the region. There are going to be microcultures of masculinity indexes, safety, can I speak out or not? Am I passive aggressive or am I fully aggressive, right? Those types of things. Those are going to be nuanced in cultures, right? You go to Denmark and everything's passive aggressive. And you come to the US and everybody's just in your face. I'm going to tell you what it is, right? So you do get those differences. But for the most part, when you're talking about organizational tension, those kind of sit back and the bigger issues come out based on our industry, based on the leaders and how we've run the organization, what's driven success. Those are bigger factors. Yeah, thanks for the question. There's a hand over here and one over here. Yeah, go ahead.
My question is, when you've seen tension through different organizations, are there tactics or conversations that you've seen when you implement it, it can cut through the tension really fast?
Good question. Unfortunately, the biggest problem that I see is that leaders don't want to listen. So if you are a change leader inside an organization, you're not seen, you're not heard. And that's not only if you're a woman. Even the men in the room who are trying to be change agents in the organizations are often trumped by status, by authority, by position. We call this default power, right? The higher up you go in an organization, the more default power you carry with you. The way that we can work is by coming in from the outside, you can kind of cut through that BS. And you can more openly challenge what's happening in the room. And that's what I'm saying is a sad thing, that a lot of times this can't happen internally. In fact, I would even look at my own self as a leader. I was a little bit afraid to bring someone in because I felt like it was weak. Like, I should be able to do this. Until I met Richard and I realized, oh, wow, that's a sign of strength that Richard actually did that. But a lot of leaders aren't Richard. And so what, unfortunately, that I find is sometimes you need that external catalyst to create, especially the higher up you go in the organization. The number one feedback we hear is, I wish my manager could hear this. And that's an invitation for us, right? We love that. We love to work with organizations that way. So as an internal, I guess I would go back to context and data. we can break through some of this with data. So can you find ways to gather more data? Can you bring something so we can show a mirror up? And that's the only thing I've really found to help, even dispel a lot of myths and misunderstandings. So, yeah, thank you.
Thanks for the presentation. It's the most unique microphone I've ever used. I was wondering if you could say more about the managing and navigating the perceptual differences, because the charts you showed, I think those were central tendencies of cohorts, current versus aspirational, but on an individual basis within one layer, you have a high variability from person to person. And maybe because it's temperament or background or whatever, the perception of where a dial should be varies a lot from person to person, right? And so
totally.
Along any one of those dimensions, you could look at a peer within the same level and have a conviction that their natural orientation for a dial is like kind of off the mark.
Yeah.
But it's like data doesn't, I don't know, maybe you would data is maybe not the most effective thing. Is it persuasion and conversation? Is it trying to appeal to some higher level within that hierarchy? Like, how do you navigate those situations?
Yeah, thanks for the question. One of the fascinating things I've learned over time is, even in my own coaching, so I had a coach, and I never thought of myself as an emotional, like I have an emotional weakness. I'm not very good with EQ. I'm more on the IQ side. And, and I was working with a coach once, and we were talking about some of this and the fact that I don't pick up on the cues all the time and things like this. And I said, I just deal with facts better. And she said to me, something that just sticks with me today. She said, Pete, feelings are facts. And it just stuck with me. It's your fact. It's how you feel. And that really stuck with me, not only from a personal perspective, but also as I think about perceptions. And perceptions are a form of reality. And yes, we're all perceiving different things. And one of the dangers when we look at charts like this is look at the data, the detail. That's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at the patterns, the trends, the big picture, the directions, right? Things like that. That does tell a story. And I think as leaders, if they look at this like a formula, they're going to be in the wrong boat. But they look at this as a tide and how it's leaning. It's really valuable. The second thing I'll say is when people feel tension, they have a tendency to want to pull swing the pendulum all the way to the other side. And you see that in a chart like this. We feel a lot of pain. We want to go way over here. What's fascinating, and I don't know if you can really see it between these unless I put them up side by side, but you'll notice the dotted line, especially in create. Look at that dotted line. It came in too. So what I noticed about tension is you might actually make a change, that's the solid line, but then the perception of what's needed also changes. And that's fascinating, right? So alignment isn't just about change, it's about perception of change and perception of what's needed and the discontinuance between, or what is that called? Discontinuity between what is and what should be. Those matter, and how people feel. And it's not the only thing, but I'm finding it to be quite valuable. I don't know if that answered your question, but touches on it. Just one more minute. So if anybody's interested, feel free. I can chat. I'm here all day, so feel free to chat with me. Again, we got some QR codes if you want to know more. We got some stickers out there. We got some pens. I do have a few gifts up here if you're interested in something more. But thank you. Appreciate it.